The sound of the hunting horn rang across the open countryside. The man atop the black mare rode. His bow was in his right hand, the reins in his left. He sighted out. He'd seen the figure just a moment before, racing over the grasslands. But the woods were close, and if the quarry knew what was good for it, it'd be running for them as quick as he could. The rider, the knight, kicked the mare into a full gallop, straight towards the woodlands. Sure enough, as he topped the next rise, he saw the dark figure disappearing into the tree line from the low light of the setting sun. He fitted one arrow to the bow, drew back, and let loose just as the figure moved into the forest. It was a shot from some distance, but the arrow flew close. It impacted into a tree a few feet into the forest line. The figure was could be barely discernible, flashing between the spaces as the woods thickened. It wasn't long, though, on horseback that the outrider reached the edge of the forest. The bow wouldn't be of much use there in close. He put it back to the side, the flank of his mount, and he drew his short sword, reins gripped, peering around as he headed into the forest. He took his horn in his left hand, let out the warning call. The quarry was close. He let the others know. He proceeded carefully. He'd find this bandit, bring him to justice. The blade stuck out from the middle of his chest, just below his ribs. He couldn't breathe. And as the blade pulled back, he came with it off the back of his steed to the ground. His eyes turned to try to look at the figure above him, but already he was being pulled up with a formidable strength, one hand shoving him against the side of a great oak tree. His mount, he saw, his eyes followed as it disappeared, bolting into the dark woods. The man, his face completely cloaked in the hood, features and skin indiscernible, gloves and cloak covering everything, held him there and drew the strangely blue-lit sword against his throat. "How far are the others? When will they be here?" came the voice. The figure didn't. The hunter couldn't answer, the feeling of pain too much. The quarry, its eyes narrowed underneath the hood, and with a draw of the blade, slow as it stared down the hunter, cut his throat and let him slump to the ground. There's a boy holding a curved knife to his hand and looking up. I don't want to do it, Father," he says. "I don't want to do it." "Be a man, Arthur," came the voice. "It's just a little blood. Our people have been doing this for hundreds of years. It's easy," he said, slicing his hand and squeezing the blood into the river that flowed before them, a few drops. I don't see why," said the boy. The father, without warning, brought his hand down underneath the chin of the boy, sending him sprawling several feet with a loud crack. "Would you rather I did it?" said the father. No, said the boy. I'll do it, he says. He brought his hand out, looking up. The father glared down. "On with it, then!" "Ah!" the boy said, cutting his hand, squeezing a few drops into the river, wincing. father shook his head. We have no room for weaklings, boy. Next time you'll be quicker about it. The boy is a young man, and it is winter, and snow covers the forest floor. He and his father stand at the edge of a field, snow-covered field, grass poking up, reeds poking up from the field, frosted over. The father stands with his arms crossed, and the boy stands at his side, the young man. You realize this is a great honor, says the father. I know, Father. I'm prepared. It is these rights that have given us the power to survive all of these years. I know. When the Romans came, it is these rights that showed us the way. I expect you, to bring back any guidance that will show us through these crises. I have done all the rituals to prepare myself. I am cleansed and ready to receive. I am a vessel, Father. You've taught me the ways. I know the ways. Anything the spirits offer you on the ice, you are to accept with gratitude. You will not refuse them. You will bring back everything they offer you as gifts to our people. Refuse them nothing. Remember this, Arthur. Remember this. Well, go on. They're waiting. His father stepped back. Arthur walked forward onto the snow, one step, and another, and another, and he looked down and he saw the shadows when he lifted up his foot underneath the ice the snow fell on top of. Not a field, but a lake frozen over, reeds coming up through the thick ice. He walked out in this empty plain, feeling the ice under his foot, sensing the water beneath this lake of his people, a sacred place. Arthur walked out, breathing, walking out over the ice, feeling the cold. And he reached, after walking for some time, reached the emptiness and glanced around. There were no figures in sight, no humans. There was a bird, flew. There was wildlife, he could hear them, but none of his people were permitted to watch this. And he began to remove his tunic, his furs, his leggings, all of his leathers, until he was naked there, even his boots naked on the snow. And then he pulled from the pile the long curved knife. He reached, stepping out into the snow. All of his skin open to the cold. He cut a long cut down his hand and passed the knife into the other hand, and a long cut down the other hand. No pain on his face this time. And he threw the knife to the side, and he reached up, and the blood dripped down his arms and onto the ice below, coloring it red. I await you, spirits. I await the guidance for my people, the Silures people. I am Arthur, Silures' son, and I have come here at the behest of my people in the ancient ways to serve you and to ask for your guidance. There was a long moment where there was no answer. I am, he began to call out again. And then there was the sound of the crack. And his feet gave way, the ice beneath him splitting open. And without another sound, he fell beneath. His hands scrambled only for a second on the ice before they slipped under. The ice, if anyone had been watching, they would have seen, sealed up again over his head. He was drowning. His hands looking for the ice again, but everything was openness, was silty, freezing water. He could take no breath, and the shivering had begun and stopped almost as rapidly. His body could barely move there in the frozen water. His eyes were wide open, looking around, but the reeds and the silt made everything dark and murky. And when he saw the shape coming towards him, there in the depths, he couldn't make it out what it was, but it was big, like a large creature, a fish, a serpent. It moved towards him, great strides, leaping towards him in the depths, until it was almost upon him. And there, he saw it. He saw her, and he knew that surely he was dead. For there, looking at him beneath the waves, was a woman. She had fins like white wings from her neck stretching out, and they beat there in the water, keeping her still. She was naked like him, her skin white, frozen. She beat there in the water before him, her long hair streaming out. None of the stories that his people had told of this. They heard voices out there on the ice. The spirits came to them. They spoke to them. But this was death. This was the end. The spirits, too, the last of the allies of the Silures, their last hope. Even the spirits had turned on him, had turned on them. His eyes lit up, a plea in them, looking at the woman. And she looked at him, and he heard the voice then, heard the voice within him. Tell me your name. He could not speak, but the words came from his heart, from his gut. I am Archer, Silures' son. I am sent here as emissary. Ah, another Silures. I was hoping one would come soon. She moved around him as she spoke, navigating the depths with such ease. What are you doing to me? He called out. We have need of your people, came the voice. There are things changing, and we have need of you. Let me out of here! Let me out of here! I'm dying! You aren't dying, boy. You are being remade. I'm drowning! I'm drowning! I'm drowning! I must breathe! Do you accept the gift that we bring? Came the voice, and her eyes passed over his as she drifted before him. He knew that death was coming any moment. He would gasp in, and he would die. Yes! Yes! He answered. Yes! Remembering his father's words. The instinct for obedience kicking in even now. Take this, she said, and she pulled up what looked like a rock caked in mud. A little piece of wood, the pit of an apricot, and she brought it to his mouth, closed as his eyes began to bulge, and she shoved it in, and she held his mouth shut as he choked on the pit and swallowed and began to cough. He could feel the water rushing in, and his eyes rolled back in his head. And then he was coughing and choking beside the lake on the snow, coughing up the water of the frozen ice. And he was naked. And his people, he looked up as he choked, stood at the tree line just nearby. And they came forward and looked down at him. "Well, help him up," said the old woman. His father came and reached out and took his by the bare skin, reached down, take his shoulder and his arm, and began to pull him up. And Arthur was coughing, and his father suddenly dropped him. Arthur fell back to the ground, and father stepped back. The old woman said, What is it, Merlinus? Why do you leave him there?" And his father spoke and said, "His skin, lady. His skin is as cold as ice." And when Arthur looked up at them again, they saw his eyes. Water coming out of his mouth still in trickles and spurts. But his eyes, they were the frozen black eyes of a man dead for weeks. "How did he do it, Cor?" came the voice of one of the knights, still astride his horse. Cor, a burly knight, clad in mail, thick leather gloves, came forward to the figure pinned against the tree, running one finger down the skin of the face and examining the wound through the chest. "Stabbed from behind," he said. "He ambushed." The other warriors, outriders, looked uneasy, glancing around into the woods. "It was just one of them. One of us," said Cor. "I'm sure he wouldn't attack us as we are here in force." He turned back around and began to walk away. He left his sword," said the first knight again. Cor nodded. "It's a strange one," said, leaning in closer. The first knight said, It looks as if it's made from glass." And the sword, which still impaled the outrider to the tree, dripped blood off of its end and was transparent, could be seen through. Cor shook his head. "That's not glass. That's ice," he said, and he mounted back up on his horse. "We'll need to get the full militia out here in force. We ride back for Eanric. Yeah!" And he led the party out of the border of the woods. And they rode away, watched from the boughs of a tree nearby.